Hey, I'm AnthonyRomano, and this video is going to tell you some amazing tips for managing caffeine so that you don't get any problems, no adrenal burnout, suffering in your workouts and being dependent on caffeine. You don't want any of those problems, and I'm going to tell you some amazing tips for managing stimulants overall and caffeine. And keep in mind, a lot of this is my own conjecture based off of the work I've done with clients and seeing what's worked over, years of coaching, but I am also going to have some hard stops here based off of scientific data. So trying to crank out the early morning video here. It's like 5:30 a.m. So excuse my keto nerd red light and try not to blast myself with blue light the first thing I do when I wake up. But I will do that shortly afterwards to time the sleep schedule a little bit better. But I'm trying to get these videos out, and if you could like the video as well, that will make YouTube show my content to more people. That's all you have to do to help me grow my page. Let's get into it. So, had some questions lately from some clients about caffeine and stimulant intake, and the biggest hard stop I'll give you right off the bat before I get into some of these other amazing tips is that you never really want to exceed over 400 or 500 milligrams of caffeine per day. My kind of recommendation for a lot of people is if you're a woman, no more than 400, if you're a man, over 500, just because the common weights, body mass of men and women generally puts it so that those marks are where somebody's going to experience adrenal fatigue. Now, keep in mind, anybody who has higher status in the scientific realm will say that adrenal fatigue isn't a real thing. It doesn't exist. Your adrenals don't actually get fatigued. They don't. They just have a harder time churning out cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and other parts of your body is where the fatigue manifests itself. So you will find injuries are coming more frequently. That's what I've always noticed. And if you're somebody who's ever had, when you were in college or university or a new job, when you were young and you were just slamming the stimulants, the caffeine, to get through the day, you were probably pushing closer to those amounts, and you might have found that you were actually less productive overall because you're just relying on this stimulant, relying on this external source of cortisol spike to basically get you to be stressed enough to do something. That's basically the premise behind a lot of people's usage of caffeine and stimulants. So, like I said, some amazing tips are going to come up by the end of this video, so I encourage you to stay to the end because they're going to really blow your mind. But for starters, my general rules of caffeine are don't exceed 400, 500 milligrams, right? Easy. However, you want to get to around 1 to 2 cups of coffee a day if you're intending on keeping it in your, lifestyle. But from that point on, you never want to become dependent on caffeine or stimulants in general. So one way to do this is if you are somebody who is, doing any of the keto stuff I talk about, because I've been doing that for a decade, you might want to have a bulletproof coffee or a coffee with fats in it to slow the release of caffeine. So basically throughout the morning time, you can get more out of that morning cup of coffee rather than just the quick burst of caffeine that you would have been getting. Now, caffeine will digest slower and you'll basically get the same effect, except you might not need to redose with more caffeine later in the day. So that's one good way. Now, I also have other videos on nootropics, which are brain supplements, which I'm going to explain a little bit of here, but there are other alternatives you can also use to throw into your day so that you do not require as much caffeine. So here's the way caffeine works. The way caffeine works is it makes you not tired. It doesn't actually give you more energy. It binds to adenosine in your brain, which basically makes you tired. So it basically blocks, it's an antagonist of adenosine. So if you are constantly redosing caffeine, you're basically going to be setting yourself up for a huge crash, which is, everybody knows this, right? But that's the actual mechanism behind it. So when we're looking at making this manageable, what you're best off doing is, first of all, lowering that caffeine intake, okay? Maybe make it a bulletproof coffee in the morning, maybe make it a coffee with fats in it, right, to slow the release of that caffeine, and then maybe, use a smaller cup, use an espresso, okay? I'm an Italian guy, okay? I've been having espresso since I was 13, probably even younger. So I can tell you right now that not only have I had those times in my life, like your first job or your first college university semester where you were just slamming caffeine. I've had those times, but it can also be beneficial for you to just lower the dose that you use at every subjective moment rather than simply just, cutting it off. Now, for sleep, what you want to do is you want to make sure you always have at least 6 hours of time between bedtime and your last cup of coffee. Now, there are different speeds of metabolization that some people have genetically. You can actually get that tested, I'm pretty sure. Most of those gene tests people do that tell you your ancestors are you're however many percent Neanderthal or something like that. Those will tell you how quickly you metabolize caffeine. But the general rule here that applies to most people, the broad sweeping net here, is try to keep at least 6 hours. So if you're somebody who's trying to cut it out 9 hours before, because you're trying to be extra conservative, maybe, don't push past 6, okay? Now, granted, you might be very sensitive, but either way, lower the dose, maybe have a little espresso or something instead. And of course, always try to make sure you're getting good quality coffee. If you're not getting good quality coffee, it might be containing lots of mold toxins. So that's what a lot of coffees will have. And I'll tell you that when I was in university and school and law school, I would have a lot of these like instant coffees, okay? Because that was what was at the school campus. And actually that's what I was trying to do to save money as well. I would bring my own instant coffee. Literally, that's what I would do. So silly now that I think of it, because I would always crash because there's this mold toxins, okay? If you've ever been familiar with the work of Dave Asprey, this guy goes very deep into not only the keto stuff, he created Bulletproof Coffee, but he also talks about the mold toxins, and that's something that's very pervasive with a lot of food that has to be preserved and can build up moisture and mold. And most people are going to react to mold that well. And in fact, many people are sensitive to it. But when it comes to coffee, get good quality beans. Okay? Now, when we're looking at the nootropics you can add in, the final other tips here. For a lot of people, you might be burning out your brain's ability to produce catecholamines from just excessive caffeine usage. And I also have some adrenal protocols that I use for a lot of people. You can actually find them in the Keto Shred program on my website, romanoketo.com. It's like literally the best fat loss protocols for keto dieting, built over a decade of doing it myself and coaching people. So I highly recommend you go to romanoketo.com and get that. But I have an adrenal protocol in there to help people who are always reliant on their dieting, or anything really, with too many stimulants. And some of the main components are vitamin C, because your adrenals will take up a load of vitamin C. They're basically the organ that is the most dependent on vitamin C, which is a huge antioxidant in the body. And basically, you're going to need more vitamin C. You're going to need these other sort of training wheels to coax your body into, being able to produce the cortisol and have the proper catecholamine responses to certain things. But other supplements you can use are L-tyrosine. Now, you're going to want to be careful. You're going to want to make sure you're not taking any other medications that are psychological. But tyrosine, what that's going to do is it's going to basically provide this sort of energizing jolt, very comparable to coffee, but it comes as a result of producing more of the catecholamines rather than blocking the stuff that makes you sleepy. So catecholamines are stimulating neurotransmitters, and if you add an L-tyrosine, that's going to give your body the raw materials to make more of its own. So it's very hard to overstimulate yourself with L-tyrosine, but that's one simple suggestion that you could use to kind of replace a cup of coffee in the morning. And keep in mind, if you are used to the constant coffee all the time, you might need a little bit of that chemical blocking of adenosine, right? Just because you need to wean yourself off of it, because it is technically a drug. But L-tyrosine is great. I also recommend forskolin. That's an herbal supplement that basically can be creating more of the excitatory neurotransmitters as well. But it also has some other nootropic effects for elongating focus. It's also a great fat burner. It's also great for a lot of things. But overall, forskolin is another side note here. There's also a lot of other nootropics you can dive into. Acetyl L-carnitine, which is going to provide a longer energy rather than a jolt. And overall, I would recommend tyrosine would probably be the best one, but my favorite one to recommend is Zynamite. So Zynamite is a newer mango extract that's only been around for a little bit of time. I have a link to a company I'm partnered with, full disclosure, that produces Zynamite. But Zynamite is basically caffeine from a perfect world, and you don't really get any crash because, again, it works in a similar manner of providing more catecholamines rather than simply blocking the sleepy neurotransmitters. So that's ultimately my recommendations for this video to help you, reduce your dependence on caffeine, because you don't want to be dependent on caffeine in the long run. You're going to run into a lot of problems, and you're not going to be able to shoot videos with your creepy red light on at 5:30 a.m. That's it for this video. I'm Anthony Romano. Make sure you follow this page, like the video, and follow me on Instagram, and I will do my best to get back to you and help you out for free as much as I can in the comment section and on my Instagram. I'm doing lives there and stuff too, talking to people. It's really fun. But besides that, also go to romanoketo.com if you want to work together personally or have a consultation. You can book that right away, and also buy the Keto Shred program there too. All right, no more advertising. Peace.